Jack Rains, I'm excited for this one. I've seen you a couple interviews with you, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Let's go, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Got a big deal going on with a new book dropping. Name of the book is Young Money.
That's right.
It's interesting title because when I was young, I had no money. But is it really about what to do with money when you're young, or
It's
what's
funny. I
really
mean,
it about?
I've got like, the subtitle is a field guide to wealth and purpose in your 20s. I wouldn't call it a typical personal finance book. It's also it's not a rap label. Lil Wayne, I'm hoping he doesn't sue me for trying to steal his company name with Young Money. The book is really about like thinking about opportunity cost, and like money plays a role in that, right? Like I consider opportunity cost broadly how you spend your time in different, sections of your life, and money obviously plays a role in that. You have to spend money on things to stay alive, pay for experiences, whatever. But it's really thinking about like, all right, you have these like, you have a finite amount of time to be alive, and within that, you have a very finite amount of time to be young and in your 20s. When, to your point, you're probably broke, or at least like at a lower income and net worth than you will be later. So like, how do you
Mhm.
make the most out of the opportunities of this window of time before it's gone, while still setting yourself up to transition, in your late 20s and your 30s and so on. So it's really a book on opportunity cost, and any stuff related to money is framed within that lens.
Interesting you say that because I do a lot of work talking about opportunities in the trades and stuff, and
Yep.
part of it is like trying it doesn't mean you're stuck with it forever.
Right.
And I feel like there's so much pressure on young people to have it figured out at 18. Like what they're going to do with their whole life is supposed to be known right when you're heading into college and making those decisions. That seems like a whole lot of pressure for someone that can't possibly know their whole life at that age, I
Well,
don't think.
well, the worst part of it is too is like, I mean, like I read up on your background, listened to some of your stuff before this. So like I'm very in on the trades are kind of back. I also think there's a whole subset of jobs that are considered like low status that are actually like probably like high income. Like most like I would argue going into tech sales instead of like trying to carve it out in private equity is like probably a better bet for some people. That's a whole other thing. But on the like figuring your life out at 18, there's also always this like subset of people where when you go to college who seem like they knew how the game worked a few years before you did, depending on like where they grew up, where they went to high school, what school they go to, where, when you're young and
Okay.
you're dumb and you're kind of clueless, it's like it can be really intimidating to see people who feel like they're on a fast track that like you missed the boat on. And it just kind of becomes a status game. Like, should I be trying to do the thing that these people who seem to know what they're doing are doing? And it's just like, it's really easy to kind of architect your life direction based off of like pattern matching on other people, particularly when like you probably just are pretty insecure when you're like 18, 19, 20, 21, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a massive problem, particularly with the internet and social media. Like we just have too much exposure to like details about other people's lives. And when you aren't like a fully formed person yet, that's just really problematic.
So I feel like talking to you is great on this subject because you've kind of drank your own Kool-Aid. You've somehow figured out to from what I've seen that you've done already in your life, you did do what you're encouraging others to do in your 20s. How did you figure that out? Because that's not everybody at all. Everybody else does what everybody what mom and dad push you to do, what society says you're supposed to do, I think is what most people feel stuck doing. You somehow went a little rogue on that, which is great.
So my like take on call it like life construction is that on one hand, like I'm very motivated to make a lot of money, be successful. Like I do not want to be in my 40s and feel like I'm poor, right? Like that's like that was never I'm in my late 20s now, that was never something I wanted. But I was also really cognizant at like 23 or 24 that I was only going to be young for a little while. And there's like a lot of dumb, fun stuff that you can do when you're young and get away with that like you either aren't going to want to do when you're older, you aren't going to enjoy doing when you're older, or you just won't have the opportunity to because life responsibilities and complexity and all that. So like to your point of like kind of practicing what I preach, a thing that I always thought would be really cool when I was younger. I love studying abroad. My grandma takes like every grandkid in the family on a trip when they were a kid, like anywhere in the world. And when I was 11, we went to Tanzania on a safari, which in hindsight, it's like crazy for like a late 60s woman to take her 11-year-old grandson to Tanzania, but we had a blast. And like I had really romanticized this idea of like Ooh, like, it'd be fun to do one of those really cheap, like, staying in hostels, sleeping on buses, kind of vagabonding trip around the world. Because I knew when I was older, like, I still like to travel, but it's like, alright, hopefully it's a business trip where the hotel is comped or, like, I'm actually staying somewhere nice, and I was like, a couple years out of college, I realized I have this really short window for what's the crazy fun thing I wanna do now that I can't do later that also just won't cost all that much, and that was
Okay.
that. And my kinda take on it was I had a couple of things going for me. I'd saved up a little bit of money, in my first job. I'd I'd got into a good graduate school, and I knew I was gonna go to business school at Columbia, like, a year or 2 later. So I kind of figured that, alright, any extra money I make now is just gonna kinda pale in comparison to what my career turns into after business school, and I was pretty
Yeah.
set on, like, my mid to late 20s to early 30s, like, ideally, I put myself in a position where my career goes like this. So, for this next year, before I get to kind of that stage, like, what's the most fun, interesting way to spend my time? And for me, it was like everybody has like stuff they want to do when they're young. My version of this was like I kind of want to screw off and go backpack the world and just like write about the whole thing. It was a very specific thing. I literally just wanted to have a thrill-seeking trip, and I did it also knowing there was an end date. You know, I think the two traps you can fall into are having things you want to do at a particular period in life and just pushing them off indefinitely until you never do them, or
Yeah.
chasing the thing without thinking through what the exit plan and the off ramp is, and then like kind of getting stuck in a cycle of this is really fun and exciting. And then how do I actually get my life back on track? And for me, I had grad school, career stuff would come after grad school. And it's like, all right, like let's take a shot and do something crazy. And then, get back on the path, so to speak, a year later. So on like how did I actually go do the thing I wanted to do? I kind of set up the exit ramp from that before I started it. So it was almost like a trip like that is much more fun when you know that it has an end date and you can really lean into getting the most out of it, knowing that like this is a finite thing, but let's go like maximize for fun. And that's exactly how I treated it.
Well, what I just heard is you you did something that was well thought out, an experience you wanted to have,
Yep.
and thought through it really well, whereas from the outside looking in, a lot of people see a young person do that, and it's probably impulsive
For
with
sure.
no outcome in mind, so, it's that thought process that has really helped you is my bet on the
I
experiments.
mean, it's like anything else, just like being intentional and like thinking through how you want to do thing is more important than whatever the thing is, right? Like
Mhm.
as long as you've done the work of like, this is what I want to do, this is why I want to do it, and like this is the like time frame in which I will do thing, whether that's like you want to go start your own business, all right, like have benchmarks that you should hit where if it's not working after 6 months, a year, 2 years, you go back and get a job, right? Like you can take like anything that would be considered risky, whether like new job, entrepreneurship, like leaving your job, whatever that thing is, it's a deviation from what you're doing now. Just having your like on ramp, off ramp, time frame, and like burn rate very clearly established going into it makes it much easier to just lean into the thing because you've already thought about the downside case, right?
Agree with you 100%. The best thing to mitigate risk is time, and you
100%.
have no more time than when you're young, so, can definitely subscribe to this. You read a little bit on reading your background. You stayed up all night once and read a book, I think, called Vagabonding that
Yep.
might have helped influence some of this. What'd you read there, and how did that change or help your thinking?
So it's funny. Do you know who Tim Ferriss is, the 4 Hour Work Week guy? He
Yeah,
so I've read I've read a lot of his blog posts and a couple of his books. He actually had this whole thing where he was burnt out from like entrepreneurship, working like 80 hours a week, and tried to like architect his life where like basically could he hire himself out of a job, do it remotely, and like could he get his company to the point that it kind of runs itself? And like most entrepreneurs, at first he was like super hands-on in everything and thought the whole thing would fall apart. And then he just realized he needed a sabbatical and he went to Argentina for several months and he brought two books with him. And one of those books was Vagabonding by Rolf Potts. So I thought it was funny, like reading one of his blog posts about that. And then 10,
okay.
15 years later, I did the same thing. But vagabonding is or the author Rolf Potts, he was like a longtime travel journalist, wrote for National Geographic and a lot of similar publications, and just had like a really cool life. Or like super successful journalist, Vagabonding sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Like he's just a really interesting guy. But one of his life philosophies was or is that it's stupid to just like push off like fun, travel, whatever until the end of your life. And it's actually a much better way to live that every few years you have like a mini retirement or sabbatical. Like maybe you do one in your mid to late 20s, you do another one in your mid 30s, and you make money, save money, take a break, do the thing, and then come back. And the entire book is it's a mixture of like philosophy on like why it's much more important to like stagger these different like fun life experiences throughout your life rather than backloading because there's certain trips you can take in your 20s or 30s or 40s that you can't take in other periods. And he was also really pragmatic on like both how to do it, from like how to think about budgeting the trip, how to think about the logistics of like phone service, medical care, where you should stay, and also how to go about like reintegrating back into the workforce and society. Like whether it's you take a 3 month sabbatical from your job and plan to come back, or you start putting out feelers for your next thing before you come back to the States. And it was one of those things where I had never seen somebody so clearly articulate a thing that I was thinking, that I want to do this thing now, but I also like do want to have a career and don't just want to be a drifter, right? Like he was the first person to really articulate, hey, here's how you do both. And I read that book when I was 24. My roommate had gotten into college. My like first roommate when I was like working in Atlanta, he didn't love it. He was like, like he didn't have the travel bug like I did, but I read it and I was like, oh, this is just a green light to go do this thing because apparently I'm not crazy for thinking this. So it basically was the vagabonding was kind of my justification for doing thing that I had really been kind of ruminating on for a few
On
months.
anyway. Now I can tell you that I've been nose to the grindstone since I was a teenager, so
Yep.
I've done the exact opposite of what you're encouraging and probably gonna wish I did more of what you're encouraging, but now I'm starting to pay attention to that, starting to try to, put some life events more often in
Yep.
besides just career events.
It's so subjective though. Like it's one of those things where it's funny. Like if I live in New York now and I compare myself to, I have friends who like grew up in Manhattan, like super high net worth. Like I'm dirt poor compared to them, but grew up like pretty well off compared to South Georgia, right? Like when I
Mhm.
moved to New York for grad school, like I had to pay rent, living expenses, all that, and I was like working throughout school to pay for that. But like my family covered my tuition, right? So I didn't have to take out student loans. So I'm almost in the like the middle class of the super high net worth places where I didn't have to take on debt to do these things, but like I did have
Got
to
it.
make the ends meet to live. So like when I decided to like go, bop around Europe,
Sounds like your parents figured out a right mix for you then.
yeah, they
So it
did.
wasn't just a free ride,
Right,
but it was help.
I'm not a nepo baby freeloader, but also I'm not worried about going hungry. And it's like when you know that you're, my like when I called my dad and I was like, "Am I crazy for wanting to quit my job and do this?" And his advice was like, no. Like when my dad went to law school and was a lawyer for a few years, and he always wanted to like take a motorcycle trip around America. And then he met my mom, they got married, and he just like never did it. And his take was, if you have a thing like this that you want to do, even if it feels impulsive or dumb, like, you're young and should go do it, but I'm not gonna pay for it. If you can basically, if you can figure out how to make the numbers work, great. If you can't, like, you're coming back here and, like, either we have a farm, he's like, "You're either gonna go work on the farm, you're gonna, like, work for the family business, or you're gonna be, like, doing DoorDash," right? Like, he's basically like, "Figure out how to make the numbers work and it's fine." And, I was in a spot where I'd budgeted it out where I could afford to do it. But it would be a different story if I had, like, student loan debt or credit card debt, right? So, like, I do think everything like this is like, all
What
advice is
what
context
I would
dependent.
ask you is what if you didn't have his support? What if you did it anyway?
It's interesting. Like, I think I think if I'd had a lot of student loan debt, then I probably wouldn't have done it, but I also, like, had a football scholarship, an academic scholarship, and, like, I'd like, it was one of those
Not
things where,
not
like,
financial, I meant more moral
oh,
support.
moral support.
Yeah, like,
Um
what if he'd have condemned it?
I don't know, it's easy to say, "Oh, I would've been like, 'fuck you,' and just done it," but, like, what like, at 29 maybe, but at 23 or 24, I probably wouldn't have had the balls to say that. So, I was fortunate my family was always, like, very supportive of whatever I wanted to do, as long as, like, it wasn't just stupid. But they were very much like, if you want to do a thing, cool, but don't talk about it, be about it, was kind of how that's just kind of always been the mantra. So I can't answer that question because like I have no idea how I would have reacted to that.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you want more Podcrash in your life, which of course you do, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Catch you next time.